Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sleepless Campfire. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of America, places where light fades, and what remains are stories that refuse to die. Across these hills, rivers, and empty towns are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts, each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. The Navajo Nation spans over 27,000 square miles across Arizona, New Mexico, and Utah, a vast landscape of mesas, canyons, and desert plains where cellular service fades and radio frequencies sometimes carry more than just human voices. In this remote territory, police dispatch logs contain recordings that defy conventional explanation. Now, let us begin with our first story. It was late October of 2014 when Officer Michael Begay began his night shift at the Navajo Nation Police Department in Window Rock, Arizona. The department operated from a modest concrete building near the tribal headquarters, where dispatchers handled calls from across the sprawling reservation. Michael had worked these graveyard shifts for 3 years, growing accustomed to the rhythm of domestic disturbances, traffic violations, and occasional reports of livestock wandering onto highways. The evening began like any other autumn night in the high desert. Cool air swept through the valley as Michael completed his paperwork from the previous shift. Dispatch frequency remained relatively quiet until 11:47 p.m. when the first unusual call came through. A woman from the Crystal community, 40 miles east, reported strange lights hovering above the mesa behind her home. Michael noted it as likely military aircraft from nearby bases, though the woman insisted the movement patterns were unlike anything she had witnessed before. At 1:13 a.m., the second call arrived, this time from a rancher near Sheep Springs, reporting that his entire herd of cattle was standing motionless, all facing the same direction toward an empty ridge. The animals remained unresponsive to his calls, unusual behavior even for the typically stoic cattle. As Michael jotted notes, dispatcher Sarah Wilson's voice crackled through his radio, informing him of a third call coming through from the New Mexico side of the reservation. The third call came from a truck driver hauling freight on Highway 491 near the community of Nageezi. The driver, identified as Robert Whitehorse, reported seeing what appeared to be a figure standing at the edge of the road, illuminated only by his headlights. When he flashed his high beams, the figure remained unnaturally still. As he passed within 50 feet, Whitehorse described the figure as impossibly tall, with proportions that didn't match human anatomy. Most disturbingly, when he checked his rearview mirror after passing, the figure had vanished despite the open desert terrain offering nowhere to hide. By 2:30 a.m., the dispatch center had logged 7 similar calls from across the reservation. Each report contained eerily similar elements: unusual lights, animals behaving strangely, and sightings of figures that defied normal explanation. What caught Michael's attention was how these reports formed a geographical pattern, a rough line stretching from southeast to northwest across the entire reservation, with calls occurring at approximately 20-minute intervals. At 3:17 a.m., Michael received a direct call from Chief Yazzie requesting his presence at the dispatch center. When he arrived, he found the chief and 3 other officers gathered around a speaker system, listening to a recording of the most recent call. The caller, an elderly woman from the Kayenta area, spoke in Navajo with a tremor in her voice. Though Michael couldn't understand all the words, he recognized references to skinwalkers and something about the old ones walking. What made the recording unsettling was the background noise, a low, rhythmic clicking that seemed to pulse in time with the woman's frightened breathing. The final call came at 4:02 a.m. from a family living in a remote hogan near Canyon de Chelly. The connection was poor, with heavy static interrupting the conversation. The caller reported that someone was walking around their home, tapping on the walls and windows. When asked if they could see the person, the caller replied, "That's the problem. We can see footprints appearing in the dirt outside, but there's nobody making them." Suddenly, the line went dead. Attempts to call back resulted only in a busy signal. The following morning, officers were dispatched to investigate the most serious reports. At the Canyon de Chelly residence, they found circular footprints in the dirt around the Hogan prints that appeared to have been made by something walking backward, yet leading toward the dwelling. The family insisted they had remained inside with the doors bolted throughout the night. Similar, inexplicable evidence was found at other locations, including scorched earth where the lights had been reported and cattle still standing unnaturally still. The Navajo Nation Police Department filed an extensive report on the night's events, cataloging 17 calls that defied conventional explanation. To this day, the recordings remain in the department's evidence room, accessible only to senior officers. The incident has never been officially explained, though some officers privately acknowledge that the geographical pattern of calls suggests something moved across the reservation that night. Something that left no trace except for frightened witnesses and disturbed animals. It was just after midnight on June 3, 2017, when Officer Thomas Tsozi began his assigned patrol along the northern stretch of Highway 191, just outside Chinle, Arizona. The heat of the day still clung to the asphalt and the sagebrush, lingering stubbornly despite the deep desert night that had settled across the reservation. The air carried the dry, earthy scent of dust and distant rain, though no storm clouds were visible and the sky above was clear. A vast black ocean scattered with stars. For nearly a decade, Thomas had patrolled this same span of highway, enough years that every curve, every shoulder, every cattle guard felt as familiar as the back of his hand. He knew where wandering livestock tended to graze too close to the road, where drunk drivers sometimes drifted into the oncoming lane, and which remote intersections served as gathering spots for teenagers testing curfews. He had grown to respect the peculiar rhythm of this lonely road at night, a rhythm broken only by the occasional distant headlights cutting through darkness. Traffic was minimal on summer nights, and the early hours of June 3rd were no exception. Thomas logged only a handful of minor traffic violations, pulling over 2 drivers for speeding and another for a broken taillight. Everything felt normal, quiet, routine. There was no indication that the night would end as anything but a footnote in his report log. Around 1:45 a.m., dispatch notified him of a disabled vehicle located approximately 15 miles ahead, near the turnoff leading toward Canyon de Chelly. The caller reported engine trouble but seemed calm, giving precise mile marker details and answering all of dispatcher Sarah Benally's procedural questions. Thomas acknowledged the assignment and proceeded with measured caution, though he did not anticipate any real danger. Disabled vehicle calls were among the most routine assignments, often just a stranded motorist needing a jump start or a tow truck referral. The stretch of highway ahead was straight and wide, the land opening into broad desert plains bordered by distant mesas. He sped up slightly, wanting to reach the caller quickly, especially given how isolated that section of road could be at night. Yet when he approached the reported mile marker, something immediately seemed wrong. There were no hazard lights, no silhouette of a car parked on the shoulder, no sign of anyone in distress, nothing but empty highway stretching ahead into darkness. He slowed, scanning the shoulders with his spotlight. Nothing reflected back, no chrome, no glass, no movement, just desert, just silence. Frowning, Thomas radioed dispatch to confirm the location. Sarah double-checked the call information, reading back the log entry that placed the disabled vehicle at mile marker 3222, the exact location where Thomas now idled with his spotlight sweeping the dark. Unit 31. Caller was calm and clear. Confirm you still see nothing? She asked. Affirmative, Thomas replied. Should be right here, but there's no vehicle. The discrepancy troubled him. False calls did happen on rare occasions, kids playing pranks, tourists misreporting locations. But something about this call had sounded genuine. The calm precision of the caller's voice replayed in his mind, particularly the metallic undertone he couldn't quite place earlier. He stepped out of his patrol car, keeping a hand on his flashlight, and began slowly walking the shoulder of the highway, casting the beam over the brush and sand. The dashboard camera captured everything. Thomas stepping out, closing his door, sweeping his flashlight across the empty roadside, moving eastward as though sensing something beyond the limits of the headlights. For about 30 seconds, the footage shows him walking steadily, professionally. Then suddenly he stops. Completely. His flashlight beam rests on a point in the darkness where the desert extends toward the horizon. Dispatch, he says, and for the first time, his voice betrays tension. I'm seeing something here, about 200 yards east. Appears to be. He stops again. His breathing grows louder in the microphone, shallow and quick. I don't know what it is. Sarah asks for clarification. He doesn't answer right away. Seconds pass, then sharply, it's moving toward the highway. Non-human movement, very fast, requesting backup. Those were his exact words that would later spark years of debate, speculation, dismissal, and renewed fear within the department. The recording becomes more intense from that moment on. As Thomas continues describing what he's seeing, a faint, high-pitched whining noise emerges in the background. At first, it's barely noticeable, a thin sliver of sound. But it grows louder, piercing, rising in pitch until the microphone begins to distort. The whine swells into something shrill enough that the audio system struggles to compensate. Within seconds, the sound overwhelms everything. For nearly 17 full seconds, the footage captures nothing but a storm of static and the agonizing whine that climbs higher and higher until it cuts out abruptly, leaving behind only the desert wind and Thomas shouting, "It's here. It's right." The sentence cuts off. His flashlight drops, clattering loudly against the asphalt, the sound echoing strangely across the pavement. The patrol car door slams shut hard, followed by the hurried motion of someone scrambling inside for safety. The next 2 minutes feel like listening to a nightmare in real time. Inside the patrol car, the dashboard microphone picks up Thomas's heavy breathing, the quick, rhythmic thump of his pulse against the body mic, and intermittent metallic tapping on the side panels of the vehicle. Light tapping at first, then harder, then moving. Across the window, across the roof, something circling, something testing the boundaries of the metal shell he had sealed himself inside. Between taps there is silence, broken only by Thomas's increasingly unsteady breathing. He tries speaking into the radio twice. Both attempts fail, swallowed by static. When backup units arrived 12 minutes later, they found Thomas still inside his patrol car, doors locked, engine running, emergency lights flashing across the empty landscape. He refused to exit the vehicle at first. When officers finally coaxed him out, they saw immediately the shock in his wide, unfocused eyes, the way his hands trembled when he tried to steady his flashlight. He was physically unharmed, but shaken in a way seasoned officers rarely appeared. The patrol vehicle showed no signs of damage. No dents, no scratches, no broken glass. Nothing to indicate any physical contact despite the tapping sounds recorded clearly on audio. But officers noted one anomaly: the hood was warm. Very warm. Much warmer than ambient temperature should allow at that hour. So warm, one officer recoiled instinctively. The engine alone could not account for the heat pattern left across the metal. When Thomas gave his debriefing the next day, he struggled to form coherent explanations. He insisted he saw what first resembled a coyote approaching from the desert, except it moved too quickly, far too quickly, closing 200 yards in seconds, covering distance as though unrestrained by anatomy. And as it neared the highway, he said, its form shifted, its torso elongated, its limbs straightened. It stood upright. Its silhouette became something roughly humanoid, but stretched in impossible proportions, as if mimicking human shape without fully understanding it. The head was wrong. The arms were too long. The joints bent incorrectly. And then, just as he prepared to retreat, it vanished, simply blinked out of sight, leaving only the sound of its tapping seconds later on the patrol car. Investigators combed the entire area where Thomas reported first seeing the shape. They found no footprints, no tire marks, no sign of a creature, human or animal. But they did find something else. Several patches of asphalt that appeared melted. The road shimmered with small, uneven dips, where the surface had softened, pooled, and re-solidified, despite nighttime temperatures being in the low 70s. Engineers examined the road and reported that such heat damage would require temperatures far exceeding what could be caused naturally, or by a vehicle, or by a fire. Then came the discovery that unsettled everyone, including experienced investigators. The initial call, the one reporting the disabled vehicle, had come from a phone number that showed no record of ever being active. Phone company logs contained no outgoing calls at that time from that number, nor any service contract associated with it. Yet the dispatcher's log clearly recorded the call. And two dispatchers, Sarah included, confirmed hearing the voice of a calm male caller reporting his vehicle trouble. The voice sounded normal, except Sarah later recalled something unusual. A faint metallic reverberation behind the words, as though the caller were speaking from inside a narrow metal tube. At the time, she dismissed it as cell interference. After reviewing the evidence, she was not so sure. Despite exhaustive attempts to locate the supposed motorist, no matching vehicle was ever found. No missing persons report aligned with the call's description. No roadside service calls came in. The disabled vehicle had never existed except as bait. Within the police department, speculation bloomed. Some officers whispered about the Yi-Naldlushi, the shape-shifting beings of Navajo lore. Others insisted it was a wild animal, misinterpreted through stress and darkness. Still others believed it was something entirely different, something that could mimic sounds, mimic voices, perhaps even mimic the behavior of stranded motorists. One senior officer who reviewed the footage privately told colleagues he believed the caller itself might not have been human. He pointed to the metallic undertone of the voice, the disconnected phone line, the non-existent vehicle, the lure drawing Thomas to an empty stretch of highway. Thomas continued working for another year, but he never again patrolled that section of Highway 191 at night. Eventually, he transferred to administrative work and avoided discussing the incident. When new recruits asked him about it, as they inevitably did, he simply repeated the same phrase. Something called me out there, and something followed me back. The recording remains archived in the Navajo Nation Police Department under Case File 2017-0603, available only through special authorization. Officers who listen to it today report an eerie sense of pressure during the 17 seconds of high-pitched whining, as though the sound is not merely loud but intrusive, pushing inwards rather than outward like a signal searching for something to attach itself to. Among veteran officers, the Chinle Highway incident has become a quiet warning, shared in low tones with new patrol members. If you get a call for a disabled vehicle near mile marker 322, they say, don't go alone. And if you don't see the hazard lights, turn around. To this day, no explanation satisfies the evidence. What Thomas saw that night remains unknown. What he heard remains preserved in the static. And the desert stretch near Canyon de Chelly remains unnervingly quiet, as though waiting. It was approaching midnight on November 9th, 2015, when dispatcher Clara Tallchief began her shift at the Navajo Nation Police Department's Shiprock District Office. The squat concrete building sat just off Highway 64, surrounded by the volcanic monolith that gave the town its name, Tse Bitai, Shiprock, rising like the spine of a stone leviathan from the desert floor. Even after years of living and working near it, Clara felt a familiar sense of reverence when she stepped into the building each night. Many Navajo people considered the entire formation sacred, a place not meant for wandering after dark. And Clara, though trained in practical law enforcement, never dismissed the weight of old traditions. She had spent 7 years as a dispatcher, developing a steady, composed demeanor that made her uniquely suited for night duty. Emergencies came unpredictably across the reservation's wide expanse: vehicle collisions, domestic disputes, hikers stranded in remote terrain, missing livestock, even the occasional trespasser near sacred land. The night shift demanded not only skill, but the ability to remain grounded while officers hundreds of miles away depended entirely on your voice to guide them through darkness. The evening unfolded uneventfully. A call about loose horses near Hogback, a request for welfare check approval from an officer in Nenahnesad. Routine entries, ordinary chatter, nothing out of place. By 2 a.m., the desert quiet felt deep and unbroken, a silence so complete that Clara could hear the hum of the dispatch console through her headset. She took a sip of cooling coffee, glanced at the status screen, and prepared for another hour of monotony. At 2:17 a.m., monotony shattered. Officer Daniel Bigay radioed in, his voice crisp, professional, but edged with something Clara couldn't immediately place. "Dispatch, Unit 14," he said, checking suspicious activity near the base of Shiprock, possible unauthorized vehicle. Clara straightened slightly. Trespassers near Shiprock at night were rare. The formation wasn't just steep, it was forbidden after dark. "Copy, Unit 14," she replied. "Log location?" Daniel confirmed and added, "Vehicle is parked near the restricted access area. I'm approaching on foot." His tone was calm, trained, exactly what she expected. She logged the activity line by line: location, time, nature of investigation, and waited for his next update. The desert wind hissed faintly across the microphone, followed by Daniel's slow breathing as he navigated the rocky terrain. Clara glanced instinctively at the window. Shiprock itself stood somewhere out there in the darkness, though it was invisible from the station. The sheer, vertical cliffs, the jagged ridges extending like wings, those alone made nighttime trespassing dangerous. But the stories, the traditional warnings, made it something else entirely. At 2:23 a.m., Daniel's voice returned, but this time urgent, taut. "Dispatch, I've located the vehicle. It's empty. Engine still running. No occupants." Before Clara could respond, Daniel added, "Clara, there's something strange. Tracks leading away from the vehicle. They don't look human." Clara frowned, fingers pausing above the keyboard. "Unit 14, clarify, don't look human." A gust of wind distorted the next few seconds of audio, carrying with it a hollow, distant resonance that sounded almost like the inside of a cavern. When Daniel replied, his words were measured, but strained. "The tracks are spaced too far apart for a normal stride. 6 feet, maybe more, and..." He inhaled sharply. "They just stopped, about 50 yards from the car. No return tracks, no circling, nothing. It's like whoever or whatever made them just disappeared." Clara felt a prickle of unease crawl along her arms. Before she could respond, The radio picked up something faint in the background of Daniel's transmission, a rhythmic humming, low and pulsing, as if syncing itself to the rise and fall of his breath. At first, she thought it was interference, but it carried a depth, a resonance, that made it seem almost biological. "Unit 14?" Clara said carefully. "Confirm environment. Are you hearing anything unusual?" There was silence, wind, and then Daniel spoke again at 2:28 a.m., his tone now clearly shaken. "Dispatch. I'm hearing something from the direction of the formation. Sounds like chanting. Not English. Not Navajo either. Nothing I've ever heard." Clara's stomach tightened. She immediately radioed Sergeant Benali, who was patrolling roughly 10 miles east. "Proceed to Unit 14's location immediately," she instructed. "Officer may need backup." As she relayed coordinates, Daniel returned to the line, but this time, fear edged every syllable. "Dispatch, I see movement on the ridge. Multiple figures. They're not using lights, but I can see their silhouettes against the sky. They're moving in patterns, not natural patterns." Clara's pulse quickened. She tried to keep her voice steady. "Unit 14, maintain distance. Backup en route." At 2:31 a.m., Daniel transmitted again his final full transmission, the one that investigators would dissect for years afterward. "Dispatch, they've seen me. They're coming down the rock face. This is impossible. No one could move like that. They're floating? Sliding? I don't know." His breathing accelerated into sharp, uneven bursts. "I'm returning to my vehicle. Requesting immediate backup. Multiple subjects, possibly armed." The rest of the sentence cut off in a flurry of crunching footsteps and the rapid clatter of Daniel running across stone and sand. And then, radio silence. At 2:33 a.m., every frequency Clara tried returned only static. Daniel was gone. Benali could not be reached. Even other units attempting check-ins had their transmissions swallowed by dense, choking interference. 7 minutes of total blackout. 7 minutes that Clara would later describe as feeling longer than anything in her life. It wasn't just static, they all agreed on that. Beneath the static was something layered, muttering, almost patterned. At times, it resembled chanting. At others, whispering. But it was never recognizable as speech in any human language. At 2:40 a.m., the radios abruptly cleared. Clara immediately reached for the console. "Unit 14, respond." Silence. "Unit 14, respond." Silence again. Then, "Dispatch, this is Benali. I'm on scene." His voice trembled despite his effort to remain composed. "Daniel's unit is here. Driver door open, engine running." Clara swallowed. "Any sign of Officer Bigay?" A pause, a long one. "Negative. No sign." As backup arrived over the next hour, the situation only grew stranger. Daniel's patrol vehicle sat exactly as he had described the other car earlier, open door, engine idling, headlights illuminating emptiness. The suspicious vehicle was still present as well. A gray Subaru Outback, engine cold, registered to a tourist from Arizona reported missing 2 weeks earlier after visiting the Four Corners region. No one had opened the doors. No one had tampered with it. It simply sat, abandoned. The ground around both vehicles was undisturbed except for the tracks Daniel mentioned, 6 feet apart. Light impressions almost graceful, ending abruptly in open space. For 3 days, the largest search in Shiprock District history unfolded. Over 50 officers from across the reservation joined, alongside Bureau of Indian Affairs agents, Navajo rangers, volunteer climbers, and local search parties. Helicopters scanned the ridge lines. Thermal imaging equipment swept the desert floor for heat signatures. Search dogs tracked what little scent they could find. But all trails ended abruptly at the base of Shiprock's western ridge. No footprints continued, no discarded equipment, no torn clothing, no blood. It was as if Daniel had stepped off the earth. Investigators found more strange details. Daniel's flashlight was missing only that. His service weapon remained holstered. His radio lay untouched. Nothing was broken. Nothing was disturbed, not even the sand beneath the open driver door. Most unsettling was what Sergeant Benally reported privately during his debriefing. As he approached the scene before other units arrived, he looked up at the ridge line, illuminated sporadically by distant lightning from a forming storm. For a brief moment, seconds at most, he saw movement. Silhouettes, several figures standing along the jagged edge of Shiprock itself. He described them as tall, thin, elongated, not standing still but swaying slightly, moving in slow, synchronized motions. When he aimed his spotlight at them, they vanished instantly, not climbing, not ducking away, simply disappearing into the stone. The investigation team dismissed the account formally, citing low visibility, exhaustion, and atmospheric distortion. But off the record, those present admitted the sergeant had never appeared more genuinely frightened in his life. Audio specialists analyzed Daniel's transmissions next. Every expert agreed. The background humming wasn't interference. It contained harmonic layers inconsistent with environmental noise. The chanting-like sounds carried acoustic properties that defied directional analysis, meaning they didn't come from one location. They came from many, or from everywhere. Attempts to isolate individual voices failed. Attempts to map the sound wave patterns produced no logical structure. Spectral analysis showed spikes at frequencies not typically generated by human vocal cords. One researcher described it as something imitating language, but imperfectly like an echo of a dialect that never existed. Despite endless examinations, the recordings yielded no answers. They only amplified questions. Daniel's case was officially classified as missing in the line of duty, though many officers privately rejected the idea that he was simply missing. They used another word never officially written, but whispered among patrol units: taken. In the weeks that followed, officers across the Navajo Nation began quietly altering their behavior. No one wanted Shiprock calls after dark anymore. Veterans of the force crossed themselves or murmured protective prayers when driving within sight of the formation. Officers who once dismissed traditional stories began reconsidering them. Even new recruits sensed the tension. Clara herself requested reassignment months later. She cited burnout, but co-workers knew better. Something in her had changed the night she heard Daniel's final breath quickening over the radio before the silence took him. She told one close colleague that sometimes, when she tried to sleep, she heard the chanting again, not in her ears, but somewhere deeper, almost like a memory that didn't belong to her. Shiprock remained silent in the months following the incident. No more strange calls. No more reports of movement along the ridges. But officers agreed the stillness felt unnatural, as though the land was waiting. Daniel Begue's file remains open. His badge number remains honored each year. But the Shiprock radio silence case still sits in the department archives, thick with transcripts, spectral analysis charts, photographs of the impossible tracks, and a final note written by Clara before she transferred out. He said the chanting wasn't Navajo. But I keep thinking, what if the language wasn't meant for humans at all? It was the evening of September 5th, 2018, when Officer Lucy Yazzie began her routine patrol of the Kayenta community on the Navajo Nation in Arizona. The summer monsoon season had not yet arrived, leaving the landscape dry and dusty under the fading light. Lucy had been with the Navajo Nation Police Department for 5 years, following in her father's footsteps. She knew the community well, its streets, its people, and its rhythms. Her patrol tonight would take her past the local schools, now quiet and empty after the day's classes. At 9:47 p.m., as Lucy passed the elementary school, she noticed something that made her slow her patrol car. The motion-activated security lights near the playground were on, illuminating the area in an eerie glow. This wasn't particularly unusual. Sometimes wildlife or even strong winds could trigger the sensors. What caught Lucy's attention was that the lights appeared to be cycling on and off in an irregular pattern, as if something was moving through the area, triggering different zones. Lucy radioed dispatch to report her observation, noting that she would investigate to ensure no vandals were on the property. As she exited her vehicle, the schoolyard fell into darkness again, the lights having completed their cycle. Lucy swept the area with her flashlight, finding nothing unusual. She was about to return to her patrol car when the lights near the swings suddenly activated again, revealing a figure standing near the equipment. Lucy approached cautiously, hand resting near her sidearm. "Navajo Nation Police," she called out. "This area is closed after dark. Please identify yourself." The figure remained motionless, facing away from her. As Lucy drew closer, she realized why the figure seemed wrong. Its proportions were all incorrect for a human adult. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that seemed to bend at impossible angles. At this point, Lucy radioed for backup, her voice betraying the unease she felt. "Dispatch, I have a subject on the elementary school grounds. Appears to be unusual. Requesting immediate backup." As she spoke, the figure turned slowly toward her. What Lucy saw would haunt her for years to come. A face that was vaguely humanoid, but with features that seemed to shift and change as she watched. Eyes that reflected her flashlight beam with an unnatural intensity. The next few moments unfolded with a surreal quality that Lucy struggled to process in her official report. The figure raised what appeared to be an arm, though the movement was fluid in a way that defied normal anatomy. Lucy drew her weapon, issuing commands that went unheeded. When the figure began moving toward her, not walking but gliding inches above the ground, Lucy fired a warning shot into the air. What happened next became the subject of intense speculation and analysis. The figure paused, tilted its head in an inquisitive gesture, then simply dissolved into a mist that dissipated into the night air. Lucy stood frozen for several moments, unable to reconcile what she had witnessed with her understanding of reality. When backup arrived 3 minutes later, they found Lucy standing near the swings, weapon still drawn, staring at the empty playground. The investigation that followed revealed several disturbing details. The security system logs showed that the lights had been triggered in a sequence that suggested movement throughout the playground. Yet, surveillance cameras captured only brief flashes of static at the corresponding times. When investigators examined the area where Lucy had seen the figure, they found no footprints or other physical evidence, despite the soft ground that should have preserved impressions. Perhaps most unsettling was the discovery of small, perfectly circular patches of ground throughout the playground where the grass appeared to have been singed, as if by intense heat. These patches corresponded to the areas where Lucy had observed the figure moving. Laboratory analysis of soil samples from these areas revealed unusual mineral compounds not typically found in the region, though their origin could not be determined. Lucy underwent extensive psychological evaluation following the incident, with experts concluding that she had experienced a genuine phenomenon rather than a hallucination or stress-induced episode. Her credibility as an officer remained intact, though she never again patrolled alone near the elementary school after dark. The incident report, filed as Case 2018-0905, remains one of the most unusual in the department's history. In the weeks that followed the incident, Several community members came forward with similar accounts of strange figures seen near the school after dark. One teacher reported seeing what appeared to be a tall, thin figure watching the playground from the distance during evening hours. Another resident described hearing unusual whistling sounds coming from the school grounds late at night. These accounts, while not officially documented, added to the growing mystery of what had occurred on that September evening. The Kayenta schoolyard watcher incident has never been fully explained, though it has prompted increased security measures at schools throughout the reservation. Motion sensors have been upgraded, and officers now conduct more frequent patrols of educational facilities during night hours. Lucy Yazzie eventually transferred to administrative duties, where she served until her retirement. She rarely discussed the incident publicly, though in private conversations with colleagues, she maintained that what she saw that night was real, something that existed beyond the boundaries of normal human experience. It was the early morning hours of March 12, 2016, when Officer Raymond Johnson began his shift patrolling Highway 264 near the Arizona-New Mexico border. A non-native officer who had joined the Navajo Nation Police Department 5 years earlier, Raymond had grown to appreciate the stark beauty of the high desert landscape, even during the coldest months of the year. The night was clear and cold, with temperatures hovering near freezing as his patrol car cut through the darkness. At 3:18 a.m., dispatch notified Raymond of a report from a truck driver who had witnessed what appeared to be a person walking along the center line of the highway, approximately 10 miles ahead. The caller had been concerned about the individual's safety, given the poor visibility and occasional wildlife crossings. Raymond acknowledged the call and increased his speed, expecting to find someone who had perhaps experienced car trouble or was disoriented. As Raymond approached the reported location, he reduced his speed, sweeping the highway with his spotlight. The road appeared empty in both directions. Raymond radioed dispatch to confirm he had reached the specified mile marker, but found no one. The dispatcher, Maria Nez, suggested that the person might have left the roadway or been picked up by another vehicle. Raymond was about to resume his normal patrol when his headlights caught something unusual on the pavement ahead. What Raymond initially mistook for debris or an animal carcass turned out to be something far more perplexing. As he drew closer, he saw that it was a collection of personal items scattered across the highway: a driver's license, several credit cards, a smartphone with a shattered screen, and pieces of clothing. Most disturbingly, the items formed a rough line extending across both lanes, as if someone had been walking while dropping belongings at regular intervals. Raymond radioed dispatch to report his findings, requesting that the original truck driver be contacted for additional information. As he waited for backup to arrive, Raymond carefully photographed the scene, noting the precise location of each item. The driver's license identified the owner as Michael Chi, a 34-year-old resident of Gallup, New Mexico. A quick check revealed that Michael had been reported missing by his family 2 days earlier after failing to return from a business trip to Phoenix. The investigation that followed would uncover one of the most baffling cases in Raymond's career. When backup arrived, officers secured the scene and began collecting evidence. What they found defied logical explanation. The scattered items formed a nearly perfect straight line across the highway, extending for approximately 200 yards. Most puzzling was the absence of footprints or tire marks beyond those made by the police vehicles. The ground was too dry and compacted to show impressions, but there was no evidence of a vehicle having stopped or any indication of how the items came to be, arranged so deliberately. As officers processed the scene, Raymond noticed something else unusual. The smartphone, though damaged, still held partial power. When he attempted to access it, he found that the last activity had been a call attempt to 911 at 2:47 a.m., approximately 30 minutes before the truck driver's report. The call had not connected, and no audio had been recorded. More disturbingly, the phone's photo gallery contained several images taken in rapid succession, showing what appeared to be a dark figure standing in the middle of the highway, illuminated only by the vehicle's headlights. The figure was tall and unnaturally thin, with proportions that didn't match human anatomy. Perhaps most unsettling was the final image in the sequence, a close-up of what appeared to be the figure's face, though the features were distorted and seemed to shift and change, as if captured in multiple dimensions. The image quality was poor, but what could be discerned was deeply unsettling to all who viewed it. The phone's battery died moments after this discovery, despite having shown adequate power moments before. The investigation into Michael Chi's disappearance expanded over the following weeks. Search teams combed the area surrounding the highway, using helicopters, ground teams, and cadaver dogs. No trace of Michael was found beyond the items scattered on the highway. His vehicle was eventually located abandoned at a truck stop approximately 50 miles east of the scene, with no signs of foul play or struggle. The gas tank was full, and the vehicle appeared to be in good working order. The case took an even stranger turn when the truck driver who made the initial report was located and interviewed. He confirmed that he had seen what appeared to be a person walking in the middle of the highway, but when pressed for details, his account became more disturbing. The figure, he claimed, was walking with an unusual gait that didn't match normal human movement. When he flashed his high beams, the figure turned toward his vehicle, revealing a face that wasn't right, eyes that reflected light like an animal's, and features that seemed to shift and change. The driver admitted that he had been too frightened to stop, continuing to the next town before reporting what he had seen. As investigators dug deeper into Michael Chi's background, they discovered that he had been researching traditional Navajo beliefs about supernatural entities, particularly skinwalkers and other mysterious beings said to inhabit the region. His computer search history revealed visits to websites discussing these topics, and a notebook found in his vehicle contained sketches and notes about various legends and sightings. Most disturbingly, the final entry, dated the day before his disappearance, read, "They're real. I've seen one. I need to prove it." The Gallup Highway anomaly case remains officially unsolved, though it has become a subject of intense speculation within the Navajo Nation Police Department. The items collected from the highway were processed as evidence, revealing only that they belonged to Michael Chi, and showed no signs of having been handled by anyone else. The photographs from his phone were analyzed by experts, who concluded that they showed no evidence of manipulation or digital alteration, though they could not explain the unusual nature of the figure depicted. Raymond Johnson continued his service with the department for another 3 years before transferring to a law enforcement agency in his home state. He rarely discussed the case publicly, though in private conversations with colleagues, he maintained that what happened to Michael Chi defied conventional explanation. The highway where the items were found has become a point of morbid curiosity for some, though most local residents avoid the area after dark, citing a feeling of unease that they cannot quite articulate. It was the evening of October 31st, 2019. Halloween, when Officer Mary Charlie began her shift at the Navajo Nation Police Department's Tuba City District Office. The small community was quieter than usual, with many families attending private gatherings rather than trick-or-treating due to recent concerns about wildlife encounters after dark. Mary had been with the department for 8 years, working her way up from patrol officer to supervising the night shift dispatch operations. The evening proceeded without incident until 10:47 p.m., when a call came through from a woman identified as Louise Benally, reporting that her husband, Frank, had not returned from a visit to a relative's hogan approximately 12 miles northeast of town. Frank had left at 7 p.m. and should have returned by 9:30 p.m. at the latest. What made the call particularly concerning was that Frank had taken the family's only vehicle, and there was no cellular service along the route he would have traveled. Mary logged the call and dispatched Officer David Begay to check the route Frank would have taken. The area was remote, with unpaved roads that became treacherous after dark. David acknowledged the assignment and set out immediately, maintaining radio contact with Mary as he progressed along the route. For the first hour, the search proceeded normally, with David checking areas where a vehicle might have become stuck or disabled. At 12:15 a.m., David's transmission took an unexpected turn. "Dispatch, I found something here, off to the east of the main route. Looks like a small fire or light. I'm going to investigate." Mary acknowledged the transmission, noting David's location in her log. What happened next would become one of the most disturbing recordings in the department's history. At 12:22 a.m., David's voice returned to the airwaves, now clearly agitated. "Dispatch, I've located the Benally vehicle. It's empty, engine still running, driver's side door open, no sign of Frank." Mary requested additional details, noting the unusual nature of the discovery. David's response came after a brief pause, during which the microphone picked up the sound of wind whistling across the desert landscape. "There's something strange here, Mary. The vehicle is positioned in the middle of a clearing facing east. No tracks leading to or from it, except for the ones I made approaching. The ground is too dry to show footprints, but there's no evidence of anyone walking away from the vehicle." As David continued his report, Mary noticed an odd sound in the background, a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to pulse intermittently. At 12:28 a.m., David's transmission became more urgent. "Dispatch, I'm seeing something. About 200 yards east of the vehicle. Appears to be a light, but not from any flashlight or lantern I recognize. It's moving, but not in a way that matches human movement patterns." Mary immediately contacted the only other officer on duty, requesting backup for David's location. As she completed this transmission, David's voice returned, now clearly alarmed. "Mary, there are figures out there. Multiple figures. They're not right. Their proportions are wrong." The next transmission from David's unit came at 12:31 a.m. and would become the focal point of the investigation that followed. "Dispatch, they're surrounding me. I don't know what they are. They're not responding to verbal commands. They're moving in a coordinated way, as if communicating without speaking." David's breathing became increasingly labored as he continued. "I'm returning to my vehicle, requesting immediate backup. Multiple subjects, possibly non-human." The transmission ended with the sound of David running, his footsteps crunching on the desert floor. What happened next defies conventional explanation. At 12:33 a.m., Mary's radio equipment began experiencing technical difficulties. The frequencies used by the Navajo Nation Police Department, typically reliable throughout the district, suddenly filled with static. David's unit could no longer be reached, nor could the backup unit that was en route to the location. For approximately 9 minutes, all radio communication in the Tuba City district became impossible, despite backup systems and multiple frequency options. When communication was restored at 12:42 a.m., Mary immediately attempted to contact David's unit. There was no response. The backup officer radioed in moments later, reporting that he had reached the location and found both David's patrol car and Frank Benally's vehicle empty, engines still running, doors ajar. Both vehicles showed no signs of damage or forced entry. Neither David nor Frank was anywhere to be found. The search operation that followed would become one of the most extensive in the department's history, involving over 70 officers from multiple districts, federal agents from the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and volunteer search teams from surrounding communities. For 5 days, they combed the area where the vehicles had been found. Using helicopters, ground teams, and thermal imaging equipment. Despite these efforts, no trace of either Officer David Begay or Frank Benally was found. The investigation yielded several perplexing details. Both vehicles contained their occupants' personal belongings, including David's service weapon and radio. The area where the vehicles had been found showed no signs of struggle or footprints beyond those made by search teams. Most disturbingly, investigators found several small patches of ground throughout the clearing where the soil appeared to have been crystallized, as if exposed to intense heat. These patches formed a rough circle around the area where the vehicles had been parked. Perhaps most unsettling was the testimony of the backup officer who first arrived at the scene. He reported that as he approached, he witnessed what appeared to be several tall, thin figures moving away from the location, illuminated briefly by his headlights. When he aimed his spotlight in their direction, the figures simply vanished, leaving no trace in the sandy soil where they had appeared moments before. The Tuba City disappearance case has never been officially explained, though it has profoundly affected how the Navajo Nation Police Department approaches missing person cases in remote areas. Officers are now required to respond in pairs to any reports of unusual activity in isolated locations, and many privately admit to feeling a sense of unease when patrolling certain areas after dark. Mary Charlie eventually left the department, citing the stress of the incident as a factor in her decision. She never discussed the events of that night publicly, though in private conversations with former colleagues, she maintained that what she heard over the radio that night suggested something beyond normal human experience. The recordings from that night were analyzed by audio experts from multiple agencies, who confirmed the presence of the unusual humming sound and what appeared to be vocalizations in an unidentifiable language. To this day, both Officer David Begay and Frank Benally remain missing. Their cases listed as active investigations in the Navajo Nation Police Department's files. The Tuba City disappearance has become a cautionary tale among law enforcement officers throughout the region. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous encounters are those that cannot be explained or understood within the boundaries of conventional knowledge. It was the evening of December 21st, 2017, the winter solstice, when dispatcher Clara Wilson began her shift at the Navajo Nation Police Department's Page District office, near the Arizona-Utah border. The small community was quieter than usual, with many residents preparing for the upcoming holiday season. Clara had been with the department for 6 years, working her way up from patrol officer to supervising the night shift dispatch operations. She knew the area well, its remote canyons, its desert highways, and the peculiar acoustic phenomena that sometimes affected radio communications in the region. The evening proceeded without incident until 11:32 p.m., when a call came through from a truck driver identified as John Mitchell, reporting unusual activity near the Glen Canyon Dam overlook. The caller sounded distressed, explaining that he had pulled over to rest and had witnessed what appeared to be several figures moving along the canyon rim, despite the area being closed after dark. What made the report particularly concerning was John's description of the figures tall, thin, and moving, with a fluidity that didn't match normal human movement. Clara logged the call and dispatched Officer Thomas Tsosi to investigate. The area was remote, with unpaved access roads that became treacherous after dark. Thomas acknowledged the assignment and set out immediately, maintaining radio contact with Clara as he progressed along the route. For the first 45 minutes, the search proceeded normally, with Thomas checking areas where unauthorized visitors might have parked or accessed the overlook. At 12:38 a.m., Thomas's transmission took an unexpected turn. Dispatch, I've reached the overlook area. No vehicles visible, but I'm seeing what the caller described. Multiple figures along the canyon rim. They're not using flashlights, but they're visible against the sky. Clara acknowledged the transmission, requesting additional details. Thomas's response came after a brief pause, during which the microphone picked up the sound of wind whistling through the canyon. They're not right, Clara. Their proportions are wrong, too tall, too thin, and they're moving in ways that don't match human capabilities. As Thomas continued his report, Clara noticed an odd sound in the background, a low rhythmic humming that seemed to pulse intermittently, growing louder as Thomas described what he was witnessing. At 12:44 a.m., Thomas's transmission became more urgent. "Dispatch, they've noticed me. They're moving in my direction. This is impossible. No one could navigate this terrain in the dark, let alone move at that speed." Clara immediately contacted the only other officer on duty, requesting backup for Thomas's location. As she completed this transmission, Thomas's voice returned, now clearly alarmed. "Clara, there's something else here. A sound. It's coming from all directions at once, like whispers, but not in any language I recognize." What happened? Next would become one of the most analyzed recordings in the department's history. At 12:46 a.m., Thomas's radio transmission became increasingly distorted, with static overwhelming his voice. Despite this, Clara could make out fragments of his report. "They're surrounding me. Not human. The sound is..." followed by what appeared to be Thomas shouting something in Navajo, though the words were distorted by the increasing static. For approximately 3 minutes, all radio communication with Thomas's unit became impossible, despite backup systems and multiple frequency options. When communication was restored at 12:49 a.m., Clara immediately attempted to contact Thomas's unit. There was no response. The backup officer radioed in moments later, reporting that he had reached the location and found Thomas's patrol car empty, engine still running, driver's side door ajar. The vehicle showed no signs of damage or forced entry. Thomas was nowhere to be found. The search operation that followed would become one of the most challenging in the department's history, involving over 40 officers from multiple districts, federal agents from the National Park Service, and volunteer search teams from surrounding communities. The rugged canyon terrain made the search difficult, with steep cliffs and narrow passages that limited access. Despite these efforts, no trace of Officer Thomas Tsosi was found. The investigation yielded several perplexing details. Thomas's patrol car contained his service weapon and other equipment, though his flashlight was missing. The area where the vehicle had been found showed no signs of struggle or footprints beyond those made by search teams. Most disturbingly, investigators found several small patches of ground throughout the overlook area where the soil appeared to have been crystallized, as if exposed to intense heat. These patches formed a rough pattern that suggested movement along the canyon rim. Perhaps most unsettling was the analysis of Thomas's radio transmissions. Audio experts from multiple agencies confirmed the presence of the unusual humming sound and what appeared to be vocalizations in an unidentifiable language. Attempts to enhance the background sounds revealed only more questions. The whispering seemed to have acoustic properties that defied normal sound wave analysis, with frequencies that appeared to come from multiple directions simultaneously. The original caller, truck driver John Mitchell, was located and interviewed several days after the incident. He confirmed that he had seen what appeared to be multiple figures moving along the canyon rim. But when pressed for details, his account became more disturbing. The figures, he claimed, were impossibly tall and thin, with limbs that seemed to bend at impossible angles. When he first noticed them, they appeared to be engaged in some sort of ritual or coordinated movement, facing the canyon as if observing something below. Most unsettling was his description of the figures turning toward him in unison when his headlights swept across the area, revealing faces that weren't human eyes, that reflected light with an unnatural intensity, and features that seemed to shift and change. The page static incident has never been officially explained, though it has profoundly affected how the Navajo Nation Police Department approaches calls involving the canyon areas near Page. Officers are now required to respond in pairs to any reports of unusual activity in these locations. And many privately admit to feeling a sense of unease when patrolling near the Glen Canyon dams overlook after dark. Clara Wilson remained with the department for another 2 years before transferring to administrative duties. She never discussed the events of that night publicly, though in private conversations with colleagues, she maintained that what she heard over the radio that night suggested something beyond normal human experience. The recordings from that night remain in the department's evidence room, designated as Case File 2017-12-21, accessible only with special authorization. To this day, Officer Thomas Tsosi remains missing, his case listed as active in the Navajo Nation Police Department's files. The Page static incident has become a cautionary tale among law enforcement officers throughout the region, a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous encounters are those that cannot be explained or understood within the boundaries of conventional knowledge. It was the evening of August 17, 2020, when Officer Robert Lee began his patrol of the Crown Point area on the Navajo Nation in New Mexico. The summer monsoon season had brought some relief to the high desert, though the air remained thick with humidity. Robert had been with the Navajo Nation Police Department for 3 years, transferring from a municipal police department in Albuquerque, seeking a quieter law enforcement environment. He was still learning the community's rhythms and the particular challenges of policing in such a remote territory. At 10:15 p.m., dispatch notified Robert of a report from a woman who had witnessed what appeared to be a person walking along the railroad tracks that ran east of town. The caller had been concerned because the individual was moving unusually slowly and appeared to be disoriented. Robert acknowledged the call and proceeded to investigate, expecting to find someone who had perhaps been drinking or was experiencing a medical issue. As Robert approached the reported location, he reduced his speed, sweeping the area with his spotlight. The tracks appeared empty in both directions. Robert radioed dispatch to confirm he had reached the specified area, but found no one. The dispatcher, Maria Begay, suggested that the person might have left the area or been hidden by the terrain. Robert was about to resume his normal patrol when his spotlight caught something unusual near the tracks. What Robert initially mistook for debris or clothing turned out to be something far more concerning. As he drew closer, he saw that it was a collection of personal items scattered along the railroad bed: a wallet, a smartphone with a cracked screen, and several pieces of torn fabric. Most disturbingly, the items formed a rough line extending along the tracks for approximately 50 yards, as if someone had been walking while dropping belongings at regular intervals. Robert radioed dispatch to report his findings, requesting that the original caller be contacted for additional information. As he waited for backup to arrive, Robert carefully photographed the scene, noting the precise location of each item. The wallet identified the owner as James Tso, a 28-year-old resident of Crown Point. A quick check revealed that James had a history of mental health issues and had been reported missing by his family earlier that day. The investigation that followed would uncover one of the most perplexing cases in Robert's career. When backup arrived, officers secured the scene and began collecting evidence. What they found defied logical explanation. The scattered items formed a nearly perfect straight line along the railroad tracks, with regular intervals between each piece. Most puzzling was the absence of footprints or other evidence of passage beyond the items themselves. The ground was too dry and compacted to show impressions. But there was no indication of how the items came to be arranged so deliberately. As officers processed the scene, Robert noticed something else unusual. The smartphone, though damaged, still held partial power. When he attempted to access it, he found that the last activity had been a series of photographs taken in rapid succession at approximately 9:47 p.m., about 30 minutes before the caller's report. The images showed what appeared to be a dark figure standing near the tracks, illuminated only by the phone's flashlight. The figure was tall and unnaturally thin, with proportions that didn't match human anatomy. Perhaps most unsettling was the final image in the sequence, a close-up of what appeared to be the figure's face, though the features were distorted and seemed to shift and change, as if captured in multiple dimensions. The image quality was poor, but what could be discerned was deeply unsettling to all who viewed it. The phone's battery died moments after this discovery, despite having shown adequate power moments before. The investigation into James Tso's disappearance expanded over the following weeks. Search teams combed the area surrounding the railroad tracks, using helicopters, ground teams, and cadaver dogs. No trace of James was found, beyond the items scattered along the tracks. His family was interviewed multiple times, providing information about his recent behavior and mental state. According to his mother, James had become increasingly withdrawn in the weeks leading up to his disappearance, spending hours alone in the desert and returning with strange stories about the Watchers who followed him. The case took an even stranger turn when investigators examined James's computer and personal journals. They discovered that he had been researching traditional Navajo beliefs about supernatural entities, particularly legends about mysterious beings said to inhabit the region near Crown Point. His search history revealed visits to websites discussing these topics, and his notebooks contained sketches and notes about various sightings and encounters. Most disturbingly, the final entry, dated the day before his disappearance, read, "They're getting closer. I can feel them watching me. Tonight, I'll confront them." The Crown Point disappearance case remains officially unsolved, though it has become a subject of intense speculation within the Navajo Nation Police Department. The items collected from the railroad tracks were processed as evidence, revealing only that they belonged to James Tso and showed no signs of having been handled by anyone else. The photographs from his phone were analyzed by experts, who concluded that they showed no evidence of manipulation or digital alteration, though they could not explain the unusual nature of the figure depicted. Robert Lee continued his service with the department for another year before transferring back to a municipal police department in Albuquerque. He rarely discussed the case publicly, though in private conversations with colleagues, he maintained that what happened to James Tso defied conventional explanation. The railroad tracks where the items were found have become a point of morbid curiosity for some, though most local residents avoid the area after dark, citing a feeling of unease that they cannot quite articulate. The American landscape remains vast and unknowable, particularly across the Navajo Nation, where ancient traditions intersect with modern law enforcement. The dispatch recordings we've examined tonight represent only a fraction of the unusual reports that cross police frequencies in this territory each year. Each call, each transmission, each unexplained phenomenon leaves behind more questions than answers, creating a tapestry of mysteries that defy conventional explanation. What connects these 8 incidents is not just their geographical location, but their resistance to logical interpretation. From the Window Rock anomaly to the Crown Point disappearance, each case involves elements that challenge our understanding of reality figures that move with impossible grace, sounds that defy acoustic analysis, and disappearances that leave no trace. The officers who witnessed these events remain convinced of what they experienced, even when unable to articulate it within the boundaries of normal human experience. The silence that follows these incidents speaks as loudly as the recordings themselves. In the absence of explanations, theories abound, some rooted in traditional Navajo beliefs about supernatural entities, others suggesting extraterrestrial encounters or interdimensional phenomena. What remains consistent across all accounts is the profound effect these experiences have on those who witness them, leaving an indelible mark that transcends rational explanation. Perhaps most telling is how these incidents have changed policing practices throughout the Navajo Nation. Officers now respond in pairs to calls involving remote areas after dark. Certain locations are approached with heightened caution, particularly those considered sacred in traditional Navajo culture. The department's dispatch archives contain recordings that are accessible only to senior officers, suggesting an institutional acknowledgement of phenomena that cannot be easily explained or dismissed. The landscape of the Navajo Nation holds memories that predate modern law enforcement by centuries. Traditional stories speak of beings that walk between worlds, of encounters that defy normal human experience, of places where the veil between realities grows thin. Whether one interprets these dispatch calls through the lens of cultural tradition, scientific skepticism, or open-minded curiosity, they represent genuine mysteries that continue to unsettle those who encounter them. If you or someone you know has a true story to share, leave it in the comments below. The documentation of these experiences serves not only as a record of the unexplained, but as a testament to the